Commander Alan Hayes glanced at the holographic display floating above his desk. Strange energy readings again, the third time this month. He rubbed his eyes and sighed. 20 years serving the Galactic Confederation, and he had never seen anything like this. The office around him was sparse by Confederation standards. Most of his colleagues preferred the organic, flowing designs typical of the dominant Zephyrian aesthetic. Hayes kept things simple: a few plants from various worlds, a window overlooking the vast docking area of Proxima Station, and a small shelf with artifacts collected during his career. One item stood out among the others, a worn book titled Mythological Species of the Pre-Confederation Era. Hayes had found it fascinating since his academy days, particularly the chapter on humans. According to ancient stories, humans were bipedal creatures from a high-gravity world called Earth. They were paradoxical beings, supposedly both remarkably adaptive and stubbornly inflexible, capable of great compassion and terrible violence. Most scholars believed they were fictional, created as allegorical warnings about the dangers of unchecked aggression and technological advancement without wisdom. Some fringe researchers suggested humans might have existed, but destroyed themselves before achieving interstellar travel. Others thought they were simply exaggerated accounts of early encounters with the Terulians, whose physical appearance shared some similarities with the mythical humans. The door to Hayes's office slid open with a soft hiss. Senior Science Officer Lori Miller rushed in, her blue skin flushed to a deeper shade, a sign of excitement in Aquarians. "Commander, you need to see this right away," she said, her voice quivering slightly. Without waiting for permission, she waved her six-fingered hand over his display, replacing the energy readings with a more detailed analysis. The pattern recognition algorithms just finished processing all the anomalous readings from the past 6 months, Miller explained. When viewed collectively, they show something impossible. Hayes leaned forward, studying the new data. The seemingly random energy spikes now appeared as a coordinated series of warp field signatures, moving steadily toward Confederation space. "This can't be right," he muttered. "These readings suggest a fleet of ships using a propulsion system unlike anything in our database." Miller nodded eagerly. "Exactly. But when I ran a theoretical comparison with all known and speculated technologies..." She paused, clearly uncertain whether to continue. "Go on, Miller. Whatever it is, I need to know." "Sir, the only match, with 97.3% certainty, is the theoretical human warp drive design proposed by Dr. Greg Peters before he was discredited." Hayes felt a chill run down his spine. Peters had been the Confederation's leading expert on human mythology before claiming he had found evidence that humans were real. The scientific community had ridiculed him, and he eventually disappeared to some remote outpost. "Miller, that's not possible. Humans are myths, cautionary tales. They don't actually exist." "I know how it sounds, sir, but the data doesn't lie." Miller projected another display, showing the trajectory of the approaching signatures. "Whatever this is, it will reach the outer boundary of Confederation space in approximately 15 days. Hayes stood up and paced the room. Protocol dictated that any potential first contact scenario be reported immediately to the High Council. But reporting that the approaching ships might be human? He would sound as crazy as Peters had. "Have you shared this with anyone else?" he asked. "Only my direct team, sir. They're sworn to secrecy until we decide how to proceed." Hayes nodded approvingly. "Good. We need more information before we cause a panic. The council members from the Vrel hegemony are already nervous about border security. Imagine their reaction if we suggest mythical warrior creatures are heading toward us." Miller moved to the window, looking out at the bustling activity of the station. Ships of various designs docked and departed, carrying representatives from the 12 species that formed the Confederation. Peace had reigned for over 300 years with only minor disputes disturbing the harmony. "What if they are real, sir?" she asked quietly. "What if humans actually exist? The myths describe them as unpredictable." Hayes joined her at the window. "If, and that's a massive if, these signatures belong to human ships, our first priority is peaceful contact. The myths also speak of their curiosity and desire for connection." The commander's communication device chimed, interrupting their conversation. A message from Central Security appeared. Unusual communication attempt detected at long-range relay outpost Epsilon 6. Unknown language pattern. Analysis ongoing. Hayes and Miller exchanged glances. "Sir," Miller whispered. "Epsilon 6 is in the direct path of those energy signatures." Hayes made his decision. "Contact Dr. Kevin Wright immediately. As the Confederation's foremost xenoanthropologist, he might make sense of this. And find me every record of Peter's research before he was discredited." Miller hurried from the office while Hayes sent a carefully worded message to his superior, Admiral Zenthos. He mentioned only unusual energy signatures requiring further investigation and potential non-Confederation contact. No mention of humans. Not yet. As night cycle fell over this section of Proxima Station, Hayes found himself alone in the station's historical archives. The computer displayed fragments of what were allegedly human broadcasts, collected from ancient listening posts at the edge of known space. Most scholars dismissed them as natural stellar phenomena, or misinterpreted signals from early Confederation communications. Hayes played one of the recordings. Strange sounds filled the room, rhythmic patterns that some researchers claimed was music, a uniquely human form of expression. It sounded chaotic to his ears, yet there was something almost mathematical about its structure. His device chimed again. A message from Outpost Epsilon 6. Communication attempt continuing. Partial translation achieved. Message repeats. Greetings from the United Earth Alliance. We come in peace. Hayes stared at the message, his heart's racing. United Earth Alliance. Earth, the mythical human homeworld. They were real. All this time the stories were real. As the realization sank in, another alert appeared. The long-range sensors had finally obtained visual confirmation of the approaching vessels. Hayes opened the file with trembling hands. The image showed a formation of ships unlike any Confederation design. They were angular, functional, clearly built for both exploration and defense. The largest vessel bore markings that the computer was attempting to translate. Before he could examine it further, an emergency communication from Admiral Zenthos interrupted. "Hayes, the High Council is convening an emergency session. Reports coming in from multiple outposts about unknown vessels. Get to Command Central immediately." The myths were becoming reality, and the Galactic Confederation was about to face its greatest paradigm shift in centuries. Humans were no longer legends from ancient stories. They were here, approaching with a fleet that would soon be visible to all. Hayes closed the archives and headed for Command Central. The next few days would determine whether the old stories got one critical detail right. Were humans harbingers of chaos or potential allies in a vast and mysterious universe? The Grand Council chamber of Proxima Station hummed with nervous energy. Representatives from all 12 species of the Galactic Confederation had gathered for the emergency session. Some had traveled for days at maximum warp to attend in person, rather than by hologram. Commander Alan Hayes stood at attention near the back wall, watching the proceedings. The circular room featured rising tiers of seats surrounding a central presentation area. Admiral Zenthos, a tall Arcturian with silver-gray skin, called the session to order. "Esteemed representatives," Zenthos began, "we face an unprecedented situation. Unknown vessels approach our borders. Their configuration matches no known species in or outside the Confederation." A wave of murmurs swept through the chamber. Ambassador Zultar of the Vrel hegemony rose to his feet, his insectoid frame trembling with either excitement or fear. "Are we under attack? The Vrel worlds are closest to the approach vector. We demand immediate defensive measures." "We have no evidence suggesting hostile intent," Admiral Zenthos replied calmly. "In fact, they have attempted communication." The Admiral nodded toward a technician who played a brief audio clip. The strange sounds filled the chamber, followed by words in heavily accented but recognizable common language. "Greetings from the United Earth Alliance. We come in peace and seek diplomatic relations." Silence fell over the assembly. A blue-skinned Aquarian counselor was the first to speak. "Earth? As in the mythical human homeworld? Dr. Kevin Wright stepped forward into the central area. The xenoanthropologist looked tired, as if he hadn't slept in days. Hayes knew Wright had been analyzing data nonstop since being contacted. Counselors, I believe we are indeed facing contact with the species known in our historical records as humans, Wright said. He projected a series of images above the central platform. These are artifacts and transmissions collected over centuries that were attributed to possible human origin. Most were dismissed as misidentifications or hoaxes. The images showed strange objects, flat rectangular devices, primitive spacecraft, and recordings of bipedal beings. The approaching vessels use technology that aligns precisely with theoretical models of human engineering developed by researchers like Dr. Greg Peters, Wright continued. The propulsion signatures, communication, methods, and ship designs all match our limited knowledge of human capabilities. Ambassador Zultar clicked his mandibles angrily. Humans are stories to frighten young ones, tales of violent, short-lived creatures who destroy everything they touch. With respect, Ambassador, Wright countered, all evidence now suggests those stories were based on real encounters, likely from before the Confederation was formed. The question is not whether humans exist. They clearly do. The question is how we respond to their arrival. Admiral Zenthos raised his hands for quiet as the chamber erupted in debate. Commander Hayes, he called out, you've been studying the approaching fleet. What is your assessment? Hayes moved forward, suddenly aware that every eye in the chamber was on him. He cleared his throat. The fleet consists of 27 vessels of varying sizes. They maintain tight formation and perfect communication discipline. Their approach has been steady and open, not the pattern of an attacking force. They've made no attempt to hide their presence or intentions. Hayes projected the latest sensor readings. Their technology appears advanced in some areas, particularly weaponry and propulsion, but their shield systems seem less sophisticated than ours. If they wanted conflict, they would not approach this way. A Centurion representative stood up. Let's assume these are indeed humans and they truly come in peace. What do they want? Why reveal themselves now after remaining hidden for so long? This question hung in the air unanswered, until Science Officer Lori Miller spoke up from beside Hayes. Perhaps they were never hiding. Perhaps they were simply far away, evolving and developing like any other species. The debate continued for hours. Some counselors argued for immediate military preparation, while others advocated peaceful first contact protocols. Eventually, Admiral Zenthos called for a vote. We will establish a first contact team to meet the human delegation in neutral space, he announced after counting the results. Simultaneously, we will place our border defenses on heightened alert as a precaution. Hayes was not surprised when he received orders to join the first contact team. As the officer who had first noticed the pattern in the energy signatures, he had become the reluctant expert on the approaching fleet. 2 days later, Hayes found himself aboard the Confederation vessel Stellar Observer, traveling toward the designated meeting point. The ship carried a diverse crew chosen to represent the Confederation's many species. Lieutenant Susan Grant, a specialist in theoretical xenobiology, joined Hayes at the observation deck. They watched the stars streak by as the ship traveled, at warp speed. I've dedicated my career to studying human physiology based on fragmented records, Grant said. I never thought I'd actually meet one. Hayes nodded. Do you think the stories about them are true? About their aggressive nature? Grant considered this. Some myths call them violent and unpredictable. Others describe them as compassionate and creative. Most likely, they're like any species, complex with both positive and negative traits. But they evolved on a high-gravity world with extreme conditions, Hayes pointed out. The biological implications alone are concerning. They could be significantly stronger than most Confederation species. True, Grant agreed. My research suggests they might have up to 5 times the physical strength of an average Aquarian, simply due to their development in Earth's gravity. But physical strength doesn't necessarily translate to aggression. Their conversation was interrupted by Captain Eric Johnson, who entered the observation deck with a serious expression. We've received new information, Johnson said. The humans have shared details about their governmental structure and history. They call themselves the United Earth Alliance. Apparently, they were once divided into competing nation-states, but unified about a century ago. Hayes felt a chill. The myths mention their divisive nature. Yes, but they overcame it, Johnson replied. And there's more. They've indicated that they've been aware of the Confederation for decades. They've been observing us. Grant looked shocked. How is that possible? Our detection systems would have identified their presence. Apparently not, Johnson said grimly, which raises serious questions about their stealth capabilities. The captain handed them data tablets containing the human transmission. Hayes scrolled through the information, his mind racing. If humans had been watching the Confederation without being detected, what else might they be capable of? The ship's communications system activated. Captain to the bridge. We've established visual contact with the human fleet. Hayes, Grant, and Johnson hurried to the bridge. On the main view screen, a formation of vessels appeared, growing larger as the stellar observer approached. The ships were unlike anything Hayes had seen before. Where Confederation vessels featured smooth, organic designs, these were angular and functional. They bristled with what appeared to be weapon systems, yet maintained a certain elegance in their efficiency. They're hailing us, reported communications. Officer Paul Davis Johnson straightened his uniform. This is the moment that changes everything, he said quietly. Put them through. The view screen shifted, and for the first time, the Confederation representatives found themselves face to face with a living, breathing human. The being wore a dark uniform with unfamiliar insignia. Its skin was pale with short blonde hair framing its face. The human's lips curved upward in what Hayes would later learn was called a smile. Greetings, representatives of the Galactic Confederation. I am Admiral Diane Carter of the United Earth Alliance. On behalf of humanity, I extend our hand in friendship and look forward to establishing diplomatic relations. Hayes stared at the screen, unable to tear his eyes away. The myths were real. Humans existed, and now everything would change. Silence filled the bridge of the Stellar Observer. Every crew member stared at the view screen showing Admiral Diane Carter's face. The human continued to smile, apparently unaware of the shock her appearance had caused. Captain Johnson recovered. First. Admiral Carter, I am Captain Eric Johnson of the Galactic Confederation. We welcome you to our region of space. Thank you, Captain, Carter replied. Her voice sounded pleasant but strange to Confederation ears. We suggest a face-to-face meeting between our delegations. Would you be willing to come aboard our flagship, the Unity? Or if you prefer, we can send representatives to your vessel. Johnson glanced at Commander Hayes, who gave a small nod. Protocol suggested neutral ground for first contact, but in this case, learning about human technology and culture firsthand might be valuable. We would be honored to visit your ship, Admiral, Johnson said. Please allow us time to prepare a delegation? Of course, we'll send coordinates for docking. We look forward to meeting you in person. The transmission ended, and the view screen returned to showing the impressive fleet of human vessels. Lieutenant Grant whispered, They look just like the old drawings. Bipedal, symmetrical features, hair on the top of the head. It's uncanny. Hayes nodded. And they speak our language almost perfectly. They must have been studying us for years. Captain Johnson turned to his crew. I need volunteers for the delegation. This is potentially dangerous, so I won't order anyone to join. Hayes, Grant, and Communications Officer Paul Davis all stepped forward immediately. Several others joined them after a moment's hesitation. 2 hours later, the Confederation shuttle approached the largest human vessel. The Unity was massive, at least twice the size of the Stellar Observer. Its design emphasized function over form, with none of the artistic flourishes common to Confederation ships. Look at the weapon emplacements, Davis murmured as they drew closer. They're integrated into the hull design. These ships were built for combat. Or defense, Grant countered. Don't judge based on appearance alone. The shuttle entered a large docking bay and settled onto the deck. Through the viewport, Hayes could see several humans in uniform waiting for them. None appeared to be armed, which he took as a positive sign. "Remember," Captain Johnson said as they prepared to disembark, "we represent the entire Confederation. Observe everything, but maintain diplomatic courtesy at all times." The shuttle door opened and Hayes felt a subtle difference in the air, slightly higher oxygen content than Confederation standard. The gravity felt stronger too, confirming the theory that humans evolved on a high-gravity world. Admiral Carter stepped forward from the receiving line. In person, she stood slightly shorter than Hayes had expected, but her presence was commanding. She extended her hand, palm forward with fingers spread. "This is a traditional human greeting," she explained. "We touch palms briefly as a sign of peaceful intent, showing we hold no weapons." Captain Johnson hesitated only briefly before extending his own hand. The two leaders touched palms in what Carter called a handshake, establishing the first physical contact between humans and the Confederation. "Welcome aboard the Unity," Carter said. "We've prepared a conference room where we can speak more comfortably. We've also adjusted the environmental settings to match Confederation standards." As they walked through the corridors of the Unity, Hayes observed everything. The ship hummed with quiet efficiency. Human crew members nodded respectfully as they passed, but Hayes noticed curious glances directed at the non-human delegation members. The conference room featured a large oval table with chairs designed to accommodate various body types. Windows along one wall showed the vast starfield outside. Admiral Carter gestured for them to sit. "Before we begin formal discussions," Carter said, "I'm sure you have many questions. We've been aware of the Confederation for decades, but you're just learning of our existence. This must be quite shocking." "Indeed," Johnson replied carefully. "Our historical records contain mentions of beings called humans, but most considered them mythological." A slight smile crossed Carter's face. "Yes, we know about those myths. Some are quite unflattering." Hayes couldn't contain his curiosity. "Admiral, if I may ask, why reveal yourselves now? If you've been observing us for so long, what changed?" Carter's expression grew serious. "A good question, Commander Hayes." She paused, seeming surprised when Hayes showed shock at her knowing his name. "Yes, we know who each of you are," she confirmed. "As I said, we've been studying the Confederation for some time. As for why now..." She pressed a control on the table. A holographic display appeared above the table, showing a region of space beyond Confederation territory. Red dots pulsed ominously, moving slowly but steadily across the map. "We call them the Void Swarm," Carter explained. "We encountered them 20 Earth years ago at the edges of our expansion. They destroyed 3 colony worlds before we could mount an effective defense." The delegation watched as the simulation showed the red dots consuming everything in their path. "They're not a species as you or I would understand it," Carter continued. "More like a force of nature, a collective of energy-based entities that consume all organic and technological matter they encounter. We managed to drive them back, but at great cost. Now they've returned and their trajectory will bring them to Confederation space within months." Lieutenant Grant leaned forward. "Are you saying you revealed yourselves to warn us?" "Partly," Carter acknowledged, "but also because neither of us can stand against the swarm alone. Your shield technology is far superior to ours, while our weapons systems are more advanced than yours. Together we might have a chance." Captain Johnson exchanged glances with his team. "You're proposing an alliance against this threat?" "I'm proposing survival," Carter replied simply. "The myths about humans aren't entirely wrong, Captain. We can be aggressive and territorial. But we're also extremely protective of innocent life. We won't stand by and watch your worlds fall to the swarm, even if we remained hidden." Hayes studied the human admiral carefully. Everything about this situation felt surreal. Meeting creatures of legend who came bearing news of an even greater threat. Could they trust these humans? Did they have a choice? "We would need to verify this threat independently," Johnson said cautiously. "Of course," Carter agreed immediately. "We'll provide all our data on the swarm. Send your scientists and military experts. We have nothing to hide." The meeting continued for hours. The humans answered questions about their history, technology and culture with surprising openness. They explained how they had developed faster-than-light travel a century earlier and had been gradually exploring the galaxy ever since. "We detected Confederation communications decades ago," explained a human scientist named Frank Cooper. "We've been learning your languages and studying your cultures from a distance. We wanted to understand you before making contact." "To determine if we were a threat?" Hayes asked. Cooper smiled. "To determine if we would be welcomed or feared. Your myths about us suggested the latter was more likely." As the delegation prepared to return to their ship, Admiral Carter pulled Commander Hayes aside. "Your people fear us because of ancient stories," she said quietly. "I understand that, but in the coming weeks I hope you'll come to see us as we truly are, not the monsters of legend but potential friends and allies." Hayes looked into her eyes, so alien yet somehow familiar. "The Confederation has thrived on diversity and cooperation, Admiral. If your intentions are truly peaceful, I believe we can move beyond myth to reality." As the shuttle departed, Hayes watched the human fleet through the viewport. These mysterious beings had hidden in plain sight all this time, watching and waiting. Now they brought warnings of a greater danger lurking in the darkness of space. The old myths were real, but incomplete. The true story of humanity was still being written, and somehow Hayes knew he would play a part in its next chapter. The news spread quickly throughout the Galactic Confederation. Humans were real. The mythical beings from ancient stories had arrived with a fleet of powerful ships, and they brought warnings of a terrible threat approaching from deep space. For the next 2 weeks, scientists and military experts from both civilizations worked together, sharing information and technology. Proxima Station became the center of this unprecedented cooperation. Special areas were adjusted to human environmental preferences, with higher gravity and oxygen levels. Commander Alan Hayes found himself assigned as the primary liaison with the human delegation. He worked closely with Dr. Ben Taylor, the human cultural attaché. They sat together in the station's observation lounge, watching ships come and go. "Your people are adapting to our presence better than we expected," Taylor remarked. The human sipped from a metal container filled with a hot brown liquid humans called coffee. The smell was pleasant but strange. "There's still fear," Hayes admitted. "Centuries of stories about dangerous humans don't disappear overnight. But the Void Swarm data you provided has been verified by our scientists. Fear of the unknown is being replaced by fear of a known threat." Taylor nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes it takes a common enemy to forge unexpected friendships." Hayes studied the human. Taylor looked so similar to Hayes's own species, yet subtly different. More solid somehow, with rounded ears and more pronounced facial features. He still found it hard to believe these creatures had been observing the Confederation undetected for decades. "May I ask a personal question?" Hayes ventured. "Of course. The myths say humans are unusually aggressive, even toward their own kind. They claim you fought terrible wars among yourselves before reaching the stars. Is that true?" Taylor didn't seem offended by the question. "Yes, our history includes significant conflict. We were divided into nation-states that sometimes went to war over resources, ideology, or territory. But we united as a species about a century ago, after what we call the Last War. What changed? We developed technologies that made continued conflict too dangerous. And more importantly, we finally recognized that our differences were less important than our common humanity." Taylor smiled slightly. "Meeting the Void Swarm helped too. Nothing unites a species like discovering you're not alone in the universe, and that some of what's out there wants to destroy you." Their conversation was interrupted when Hayes received an urgent message. "We're wanted in Science Lab 7, he told Taylor. "Lieutenant Grant and your scientist Cooper have something to show us." They hurried through the station corridors. The Science Lab was crowded with both human and Confederation researchers gathered around a large display. Lieutenant Susan Grant looked up as they entered. Her eyes showed excitement. "Commander Dr. Taylor, we've had a breakthrough." Frank Cooper, the human scientist, nodded enthusiastically. He pointed to the display showing complex energy patterns. We've been testing combinations of our technologies. Human weapons systems channeled through Confederation shield harmonics create something entirely new. Grant continued. The Void. Swarm consists of energy-based entities that exist partially outside normal space. That's why conventional weapons have limited effect. But this combination creates a resonance field that forces the entities fully into our dimension, making them vulnerable. Hayes looked at the simulation running on adjacent screens. The new technology appeared effective against the simulated swarm. This could change everything, he said. How quickly can we implement it? That's the challenge, Cooper replied. We'd need to modify both human and Confederation ships, and we'd need to do it quickly. Based on our latest tracking, the swarm will reach the outer Confederation systems in less than 4 weeks. Hayes turned to Taylor. We need to present this to the Joint Military Council immediately. 2 days later, Hayes stood in the Grand Council chamber again. This time, the room was filled with both Confederation representatives and human officers. Admiral Zenthos and Admiral Carter stood side by side at the center, presenting the defense plan. The modified shield weapon configuration will be deployed on 50 ships, 25 human vessels, and 25 Confederation cruisers, Zenthos explained. They will form our front line against the swarm. Admiral Carter continued. Meanwhile, our remaining fleets will protect civilian populations and prepare evacuation plans for the systems most at risk. We must be realistic. Even with this new technology, we may lose outer colonies. Ambassador Zultar, who had been among the most vocal skeptics of the humans, rose to speak. Just weeks ago, we thought humans were myths. Now, we prepare to fight alongside them against an even greater threat. The universe has a strange sense of humor. There was nervous laughter around the chamber. The tension that had marked early human-Confederation relations had not disappeared entirely, but it had transformed into something different, the shared tension of facing a common enemy. As the meeting concluded, Security Chief Nancy Lopez, a stern-faced human woman, approached Hayes. Commander, we've received disturbing news. A Confederation research vessel near the projected swarm approach path has gone silent. We're dispatching a joint scouting mission to investigate. Admiral Carter requested your participation. Hayes felt a chill. The swarm wasn't supposed to reach Confederation space for weeks. Either our calculations were wrong or they've accelerated, Lopez said grimly. Either way, we need to know what we're facing. 24 hours later, Hayes found himself aboard a human scout ship called the Venture. The small, fast vessel carried a mixed crew, 3 humans, including pilot Joe Mitchell, and 3 Confederation officers, including Hayes. As they approached the last known position of the research vessel, Lieutenant Grant monitored sensor readings. I'm detecting debris consistent with a Confederation science vessel, she reported, and energy patterns similar to those in the swarm data. Mitchell slowed the ship. Maintaining distance as ordered, activating long-range scanners. The view screen showed scattered fragments floating in space, all that remained of the research ship and its crew. Among the debris, strange pulses of light flashed, moving in patterns that seemed almost purposeful. Are those? Hayes began. Void swarm scouts, Mitchell confirmed, his voice tight. The main collective must be close behind. Grant studied her readings with growing alarm. The energy signature is different from the human records. It's stronger, more organized. They've evolved. Hayes made a quick decision. We've seen enough. We need to report back immediately. As Mitchell turned the ship away from the debris field, warning alarms blared. Energy surge detected, Grant called out. Something's approaching at high speed. The view screen showed a wave of pulsing light moving toward them. Thousands of tiny energy beings flowing together like a cosmic tidal wave. Evasive maneuvers, Hayes ordered. Mitchell's hands flew over the controls. Engaging emergency thrusters. The scout ship accelerated, away from the approaching energy wave. But the swarm entities moved faster than expected. Tendrils of light reached toward the fleeing vessel. They're going to intercept us, Grant said, fear evident in her voice. Mitchell glanced back at Hayes. Commander, we need to use the prototype. Hayes hesitated. The ship carried a small version of the new weapon shield combination, but it was untested outside simulations. Using it could destroy the venture and everyone aboard. Not using it would certainly mean their deaths. "Do it," Hayes ordered. Mitchell activated the system. The ship shuddered as energy coursed through its modified shields. The pursuing swarm entities collided with the resonance field now surrounding the vessel. The view screen showed a spectacular light show as dozens of swarm entities were forced fully into normal space, their energy dissipating harmlessly against the shields. "It works," Grant exclaimed. "The prototype works." But their celebration was premature. More swarm entities converged on the ship, pushing the defensive system to its limits. Warning lights flashed across the control panels. "System overload imminent," Mitchell reported tensely. "We can't maintain the field much longer." Hayes opened a communication channel. "This is Commander Hayes to any Confederation or human vessels. We have engaged the Void Swarm at coordinates 227 Mark 84. Request immediate assistance." The ship rocked violently as more swarm entities attacked. Through the view screen, Hayes could see a much larger concentration of light approaching. The main body of the advance force. "Shields failing," Mitchell announced. 10 seconds to complete failure." Grant looked at Hayes. "It was an honor serving with you, Commander." Hayes nodded grimly, watching the approaching wave of destruction. After centuries of believing humans were merely myths, his species would now die alongside them, facing a threat neither civilization could defeat alone. Suddenly, the view screen lit up with weapons fire. A formation of ships dropped out of warp, directly between the Venture and the approaching swarm. "This is Admiral Diane Carter of the United Earth Alliance. Hold on, Venture. The cavalry has arrived." The bridge of Admiral Diane Carter's flagship Unity was a center of controlled chaos. Officers called out reports as the fleet engaged the Void Swarm. The massive view screen showed the small scout ship Venture surrounded by human vessels, all firing into the approaching wave of energy beings. "Get that scout ship out of there," Carter ordered, "and concentrate fire on the largest concentration points." The human ships had been fitted with prototype versions of the hybrid technology. Each shot from their weapons created ripples in the gas swarm, forcing the energy entities into normal space where they could be dispersed. Commander Alan Hayes felt the Venture shudder as a tractor beam locked onto the damaged vessel. The scout ship began moving toward the safety of the human fleet's defensive formation. "Admiral Carter is hailing us," Lieutenant Grant announced. "Put her through," Hayes said. Carter's face appeared on the small view screen. "Commander Hayes, glad we got here in time. We detected your distress signal during our patrol and diverted immediately." "Your timing is perfect, Admiral," Hayes replied. "But this is just a scout force. The main swarm is still coming." "I know. We've tracked their approach vector. They'll reach the populated systems much sooner than we expected." Carter's expression was grim. "Once your ship is secure, I need you to transfer to the Unity. We're calling an emergency war council." 2 hours later, Hayes stood in the Unity's Strategic Command Center with representatives from both human and Confederation forces. The room featured a large three-dimensional map showing the swarm's position and projected path. Admiral Zenthos studied the display with concern. "Based on this encounter, they'll reach the Vrel colony worlds within 5 days, not 4 weeks as we originally calculated." "The swarm has evolved since our last encounter," Admiral Carter explained. "They're faster, more organized, and appear capable of accelerating their approach when they detect technology-rich environments." Security Chief Nancy Lopez pointed to the outer systems on the map. "We don't have time to evacuate all the colonies, and most of our fleet modification work is still incomplete." Hayes looked around the room at the grim faces. "What options do we have?" Dr. Ben Taylor stepped forward. "We've been analyzing the data from your encounter. The prototype worked, but it couldn't handle the energy load from sustained contact with the swarm." Frank Cooper nodded in agreement. "But what if we built a much larger version? Not mounted on ships, but as a network of defensive satellites around the most populated systems?" Lieutenant Grant, who had been invited to the meeting as a technical advisor, looked thoughtful. "A defensive perimeter, it could work, but we'd need enormous power generation. The Confederation's antimatter production facilities could provide that power," Zenthos suggested. but constructing such a network in 5 days seems impossible. Admiral Carter straightened. Not if we work together. Human construction ships can fabricate the basic frameworks quickly. Confederation engineers can install the shield technology. If we focus on protecting the 3 most populated systems first, we can expand the network outward as more components are completed. Hayes watched as the 2 leaders began coordinating the massive defensive effort. What would have been unthinkable weeks ago, humans and Confederation species working side by side, was now their only hope for survival. The next 4 days passed in a blur of activity. Hayes found himself coordinating between human and Confederation engineering teams. The work continued non-stop, with crews working in shifts to complete the defensive network. On the morning of the 5th day, Hayes stood with Admiral Carter on the observation deck of Unity. Through the viewport, they could see the massive defensive satellites positioned in a spherical formation around the Vrel homeworld. Each satellite was the size of a small station, bristling with modified shield emitters. "Will it be enough?" Hayes asked quietly. Carter's face showed the strain of the past days. "It has to be. We've positioned every modified ship we have behind the defensive line. If the swarm breaks through, they'll face our combined fleets." A communication came through. "Admiral, long-range sensors have detected the swarm. Estimated arrival in 30 minutes. Carter turned to Hayes. "This is it, Commander. Time to see if our mythical alliance is strong enough." Hayes returned to his temporary post on the Confederation cruiser Stellar Defender. The ship was positioned in the 2nd defensive line, its systems integrated with human targeting computers. "All stations report ready," Captain Johnson announced. "Defensive network is powered up and calibrated." The minutes ticked by slowly. Hayes watched the sensor displays as the massive energy cloud of the Void Swarm approached. It was much larger than the scout force they had encountered. A vast, pulsing entity, composed of millions of individual energy beings. "Swarm approaching defensive perimeter," Lieutenant Grant reported from her science station. "Impact in 10 seconds. The view screen showed the first wave of the swarm hitting the defensive field. The satellites activated in perfect synchronization, creating a resonance field that forced the energy entities into normal space. The effect was like watching a wave crash against an invisible barrier. "It's working!" someone shouted. But the celebration was premature. The swarm shifted, concentrating its mass against one section of the defensive network. Warning alarms sounded. As satellite power levels spiked, "They're adapting," Grant warned, focusing their attack to overload the system. Admiral Carter's voice came over the communication channel. "All ships target your weapons on grid section 14. We need to disperse that concentration before it breaks through." The combined fleet fired into the focal point. Human weapons and Confederation energy beams struck in coordination, dispersing portions of the swarm. But more energy entities flowed in to replace them. "Power fluctuations in the defensive network," Grant reported. "Section 14 is failing." Hayes watched as one of the satellites went dark. A gap appeared in the defensive. Perimeter and swarm entities poured through. "Breach in the defensive line," Johnson announced. "Enemy entities approaching 2nd defense position." Carter's voice remained steady. "All ships hold position. Activate your individual shield modifications. We make our stand here." The swarm entities surged toward the fleet. As they approached, each ship activated its modified shields, creating smaller versions of the resonance field. The space between the defensive line and the approaching swarm became a spectacular light show, as energy beings were forced into normal space and dispersed. But there were too many. Ships began reporting power failures as their modified systems overloaded. "We can't hold them," Johnson said grimly. Hayes looked at the tactical display. An idea formed in his mind. The swarm is drawn to power sources. What if we created a more tempting target? Something so powerful it would draw the majority of the swarm away from the populated worlds? He opened a channel to the Unity. "Admiral Carter, I have a proposal." Hours later, Hayes stood on the bridge of a commandeered freight vessel filled with antimatter power cells. The ship had been modified with a single massive shield emitter, the most powerful ever constructed. "Are you sure about this, Commander?" Admiral Carter asked from the communication screen. Hayes nodded. "The ship's autopilot will take it into the heart of the swarm. When the antimatter containment fails, the explosion, combined with the modified shield, should create a resonance cascade that will disperse a significant portion of the swarm. The remaining ships can handle what's left." Carter looked troubled. "There's no need for you to be on that ship. The autopilot can handle it. Someone needs to make sure the timing is perfect," Hayes replied, "and monitor the shield harmonics until the last possible moment." As the freight vessel moved away from the defensive line and toward the main body of the swarm, Hayes watched. The energy beings begin to follow it, drawn to its massive power signature. "It's working," he told Carter. "They're following me." The plan worked perfectly. The swarm pursued the bait, allowing the combined fleet to regroup and strengthen the defensive perimeter. When the resonance cascade occurred, it dispersed nearly half the swarm in a single brilliant flash of energy. The remaining ships, led by Admiral Carter and Admiral Zenthos, engaged the weakened swarm in a final battle that lasted for hours. Eventually, the last of the energy entities were dispersed or driven back into deep space. 2 days later, in the Grand Council chamber on Proxima Station, Commander Hayes, recovered from an escape pod after the explosion, stood alongside Admiral Carter as they received the highest honors the Confederation could bestow. Ambassador Zultar addressed the assembled representatives. "For centuries, we believed humans were myths, dangerous creatures to be feared. Today we know the truth. They are indeed powerful and sometimes frightening, but also capable of great courage and sacrifice." Admiral Zenthos stepped forward. "Today we formally invite humanity to join the Galactic Confederation as our newest member species." Hayes looked out at the chamber filled with representatives of 12, now 13, species. The old stories about humans had contained elements of truth, but they had missed something important. Yes, humans could be dangerous, but their greatest strength wasn't their aggression or their technology. It was their ability to extend a hand in friendship, even to those who had once